Alright, boils and ghouls. This was a very easy pick. I just threw on Tubi. I saw that the Blob 88 is on there, and I said, I'm watching the Blob. Of course, based off the original Blob from 58, right? 30 years before this, with Steve McQueen. This has Kevin Dillon. This has Shawnee Smith. This has Jeffrey DeMunn, who's worked with Frank Darabont pretty much his entire career. The script here was written by Chuck Russell, the director, and Darabont, who previously before this worked on the script for Dream Warriors, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. And then they went on to writing this. Now, this movie, just like The Thing and The Fly and Day of the Dead and a few others, this is like top tier practical effects work in this movie. The effects work is so good in this. The Blob, all the effects of the Blob, all the effects of the Blob disintegrating people and just eating them, whatever it does, digests them, looks fantastic. And I'll never forget seeing this movie pretty young, 11, 10, something like that, and seeing the kid get killed. And this is the movie that really got me going on the, all right, let's kill some kids in horror. This was the movie. It was The Blob. Because I think this is the first film I ever saw that they killed a child in a horror film. And I said, wow, they can do that, huh? So let's talk The Blob, 1988. I don't know what it was either with people in the 80s, the critics especially, and the people that were going to the theaters, the box office for these movies. This movie bombed at the box office too. People hated The Thing. People didn't care for this movie. It had a $10 million budget. It made 8 point something back. So the bomb at the box office. Man, people just weren't ready for great practical effects in the 80s for some reason. Now, I actually haven't seen this movie in probably a few years. So, isn't the meteorite that crashes in the very beginning that the Blob comes from, don't we find out later that it's because of the military, like it was a military craft that crashed with the Blob on it, and they made this as like a weapon? Now let's talk the Blob for a second, because it's an interesting creature. I said this, I don't know, sometime a while back. There's not many, like, villains or creatures or monsters or anything in horror movies that you can't kill by burning the shit out of them with fire. And the Blob is one of the only ones I can think of that doesn't work on. That it's afraid of cold. So it's weak to cold. That's one of the few creatures in horror that I can think of that fire does not work against. So if anybody knows any other ones, another one that came to mind was the tall man from Phantasm. He also doesn't like the cold. I don't know, though, if you lit his ass on fire, if, like, he'll survive it. That's my point, is, like, what horror creatures or villains does fire not work at all against? Like the Blob here. Because I can't think of many. So we're in Arborville, California, is where this takes place. And the meteorite crashes, like, right outside of there. And funny enough, this does have a link to Critters 4. Because I was looking at the credits here, and Rupert Harvey, whose name I never really heard before, was the guy who worked on Critters 3, like on some of the screenplay, and then he directed the fourth one. And he did some type of production with this movie, so this links to Critters. Amanda looks young. I mean, Shawnee Smith looks like Amanda Young. I mean, Shawnee Smith looks young in this. I really like Kevin Dillon's performance in this movie as Brian. Just the leather jacket, the motorcycle. He's just one of those rebels, don't give a fuck. Kind of reminds me of Dana Ashbrook's character in Twin Peaks of Bobby. But that wasn't for another year or so after this. I think it's funny as shit. All like the cheerleaders, Shawnee Smith, Meg is her name in this, right? They're all doing a cheer, and then Brian comes like riding his motorcycle, and then something happens with his motorcycle in the end, and he wipes out bad. And he's absolutely fine. But then there's this bum that's just sitting there and claps. And the look that Brian gives him is like, alright, you know, like, all of that's hysterical. Damn, Jeffrey DeMunn looks young in this movie too. One thing I've always liked about this movie, it's very well paced. Like, the first 15 minutes of this film, you already get to know some of the characters. You know Brian. You see his guy that he works with, he borrows the ratchet set from, Hoss. You see the bum when he wipes out earlier. You see Meg. Like, you see all the characters. Sheriff Herb, Jeffrey DeMunt's character, and the woman behind the bar that he'd ask out on a date. So you see, like, all the important people in this town very, very early on. Then it goes right into the action with the bum encountering the Blob by, like, the 15-minute mark. So I like how this movie just establishes his characters and then just jumps into the story. Then we see the bum, and he sees something in the air crash into the field right by him. That doesn't look too good. Like the animation stuff of the ship or meteorite, whatever it is, crashing into the ground, doesn't look the best. That's probably the least good-looking thing effects-wise in this entire film, because everything else looks fantastic. Oh, I forgot all about, I forget what the actor's name is, but the guy with the weird eye, and he's like a priest, and he turns evil later on. He's creepy. Also, I think it's kind of interesting that Darabont, half wrote this script with Chuck Russell, and Darabont went on to do several adaptations of Stephen King films. And like I was saying earlier, with the way they establish all the characters very, very quickly and very efficiently in this movie, it's kind of like a Stephen King story, like a small town, and you're seeing all the members of this town, all the important ones at least. It makes sense that Darabont went on to adapt some of Stephen King's novels, and he's always been really good with adaptations for Stephen King. He gets his writing style. It's almost like that's what he was going for here. Like a Stephen King-esque small town, and let's introduce you to the town folk first, and then we'll get into the whole Blob story. And they're able to do that very fast, and you know and you can differentiate all these characters from each other. Like, it's very good character development when there isn't really much character development. But as soon as the homeless dude with his dog, which is, I think, coincidental that the thing starts off with a dog also. So you don't want to have a dog in case any type of alien or extraterrestrial being comes to Earth. But as soon as he goes to the meteor that crashes, everything looks fantastic. Like, just the way that it's like jelly inside of the meteor, then he sticks the stick in there and he starts messing around with it, he pulls it out, and the way the blob is just oozing and moving on top of the stick, then it gets stuck on his hand, and this guy screams bloody murder. Funny cut gag too, like as soon as it grasps onto his hand, you see the two sons, and one of them's eating jello and it wiggles on the tray. That's funny. I forgot all about this, and this is fucking hilarious. When earlier on they show you this kid with his friend going into the pharmacy, and he's buying condoms, and then he says, like, you want regular or ribbed? And he says ribbed to the pharmacist. And then Meg's date comes over, and it's the kid, and the pharmacist is Meg's dad. So when she introduces him to the father, all he says is ribbed. That's great. That's funny as hell. I forgot all about that joke. So then Brian hears the guy screaming, and I love all the night shots here in the woods, like the way the light's shining through the trees and a little bit of fog. Looks really cool. And then Brian ends up running after this bum who has the blob on his hand into the street, and he gets hit by Meg and her boyfriend. I forget his name. Doesn't he die soon anyway? And you see how being a good Samaritan really screws your night up? They gotta go here and at the hospital, the doctor, and they have to sit there for hours, it seems, filling out paperwork and stuff. Brian's a smart one. He's like, listen, these people don't care about explanations. If you need me, you know where to find me. And he just pieces out and leaves them to just wait for this guy. That's right, we got the great Jack Nance in this as the doctor. I always forget he's in this. But the effects look so good here. Are you serious? The boyfriend that's on the date with Meg, when he sees the old man, and then he just walks into the doctor's office. The doctor doesn't even see him. People could just walk in and out and mess with patients if they wanted to. And he walks in, and then when the guy's head, when it turns and the eyes are all white and his throat's enlarged, and he gets the doctor and he pulls the sheets off, his whole body's disintegrated. All of that looks absolutely fantastic. And I love the fact that they have the blob in the background behind Taylor, who's on the phone. Like right in the background here, the blob is hanging there on the wall, and they don't draw attention to it right away. That's fantastic too. Yeah, his name is Paul Taylor, but like I said earlier, it don't matter because he dies here, and it looks spectacular. This is a movie that I forget just how good the practical effects are until I watch it again. And I don't watch this movie too often, every few years or so. I need to change that because it looks absolutely phenomenal. When the blob is on top of him and his whole body's engorged in it, his face starts melting, and then she goes, I totally forgot this, that she goes to like grab his arm and his arm rips off and she faints, and his fingers are twitching still on the ground. All of that looks excellent. So Meg just saw her date get annihilated by the blob, so she's hysterical. Her parents come and pick her up, and then right as she's leaving, they bring Brian in. But then we get another practical effects scene that is just excellent, with the couple that's on like the urban legend date under a tree, like in make out point. You can just picture and hear the sound of the hook knocking, and they're in the front making out. And then when he goes to make a move, he doesn't realize the blob like took her body over, and she turns to him, and like tentacles of the blob come out, like there's stuff coming out of all of her orify and wrapping around him, and he kicks the car window out. Great scene. So smartly, the sheriff lets Brian go, because he says there's no motive, he doesn't have blood on him or anything, and he says he's not a murderer, he's a punk. Even though the other deputy has like a real fucking hard on for Brian, he's like right up in his face, so they end up letting him go. And then he meets up with Megan, and they got to figure out what the hell this thing is. I really like the dynamic between Brian and Meg too. She tries to talk to him, and he says, listen, like, I'm exhausted, I'm hungry, I don't feel like conversing with anybody. And then he goes into the bar or whatever it is, and it's after hours, but they're talking, and just their little banter back and forth. And she says shit, and he says, wow, I never heard you say shit before, how's that feel? Like, they got some nice dialogue together. This might be the best practical effect in this film. This and maybe the phone booth a little later, when they're at the restaurant, and then Fran, the waitress, she's in the back, and there's the guy who's putting his hand down the drain, and then he pulls out the little substance, and what the hell is this? And then the blob comes, and it just grabs him by the face, and pulls him face first down into the pipes, and they come in, and his fucking leg is like sticking out, and blood is going everywhere. And then the way that the pipe enlarges, because like it's fitting his whole body down there, and then the blob explodes up onto the ceiling, and tentacle flies out. All of that is absolutely breathtaking, which then Brian and Meg get chased into the freezer. But this is where they find out that this thing is weak to cold, because it tries breaking in through the bottom of the door, and then it like curls away. And they realize, all right, this thing does not like the cold. Maybe we can use it against it. Yeah, excellent looking. Like back-to-back, just amazing scenes that showcase the effects work in this movie. When Fran's in the telephone booth, and she's calling, trying to find the sheriff, and she says, the sheriff went to the diner. And then you see the blob is like all encasing the entire phone booth. And then you see Herb, the sheriff, and you see his body and the badge and stuff like in the blob on the outside of the phone booth. Then the way it just like starts leaking its way in, and then just crushes everything, and her body just gets crushed. God damn, the effects are so good in this. Yeah, that's what I thought. So it is a biological weapon, and it was a satellite that they had this weapon in, and like space radiation ended up mutating it, and then it crashed to Earth, and now it's the blob. I mean, I don't know about this whole government organization just like telling this whole story and telling all this information to these civilians. He just starts spilling the beans on everything to Brian and to Meg. I don't know. I find that hard to believe that a government agency that's supposed to be there to cover up this huge mess that they created, it's just going to start telling their entire mission and like everything about this organism to two teenagers. The whole theater scene is great. The way that they film the blob, like when it's coming like above the screen and it's like coming into the theater and the light that's shining through it, and then when it just keeps growing and it's like picking people off left and right, the effect of the girl's head, like when she peels her head the other way and like just all the skin is peeled off, all of that looks so good. So this blob is now at 1,000 times its original mass, and this Dr. Meadows and this whole government organization that deals with this bioweapon, they still want to contain it. And they said that they'll have a leg up on the Russians. So this is like a weapon that they formulated during the Cold War. And they end up putting the town in a medical quarantine, is what they call it. So nobody's allowed out of that town. Nobody's allowed to come in. And Brian hears this, so he better get the fuck out of there. So the blob ends up chasing Meg and her two younger brothers down into the sewers. And then this dickhead head of this organization, Dr. Meadows, he ends up saying, hey, they're expendable. He wants to contain the blob down there, and he wants it alive. He don't give a shit what happens to the civilians. And that's sadly exactly what would happen in real life. Yo, I love how they're in the sewer, and the young brothers, like, I swear I'll never sneak off and see a movie again. Like, because this whole thing going on with the blob, for some reason he thinks it's because he snuck out for a movie. That's hysterical. Yeah, I'll never forget seeing this kid die for the first time when I was a kid. Like, it still looks very, very good. Like, it looks very creepy. It's very effective. His corpse, I love it. He gets pulled in, and then you think the first time you see this, like, there's no way. All right, she's going to rescue him. Then just the scare of his body coming out, and his whole face is fucked up beyond belief. All of that's excellent. And like I said, set me on the path that I'm on today. Make sure as many kids get murdered in horror movies as possible.
Kids on the beat, kids on the street, beat kids, beat kids.
Then they end up getting out of the sewers after a whole, I don't know about this whole scene with him on the motorcycle, and the movie jumps the blob. Nice tense scene too, when they both got guns on each other, and Meadows is telling Riggs, the deputy, to shoot Brian. And we already know Riggs doesn't like Brian very much. And he's telling him, this thing is man-made. How do these people know when to show up, or where to show up, or that this even happened, or anything? Think for a second. And then I love the effect when Meadows gets pulled into the sewer. And then you see the blob fill up his mask. And then the way, like, the body shakes after that before he gets pulled down into the sewer... The effects really hold up for this film. So then the ground rumbles, the blob is humongous, looks awesome, and then Brian ends up getting the snow truck that has like liquid nitrogen or some shit on it, and that ends up blowing up and freezes the blob. Then we get this whole weird ending with that priest earlier who found a little piece of the blob in that diner, in the kitchen by the fridge, and he like put it in a little mason jar. He has like some religious cult now, and like the blob, he's waiting for like a sign from God when to release the blob again. And that's how this movie ends. I mean, it's a fine ending, but I don't really get it. I mean, he's saying that the rapture will come one day, and it's heavily implying the rapture is going to be like the blob taking over. But yet he controls the blob. So he controls if the rapture happens or not. So if you don't want the rapture to happen, then just don't release the blob. And if he does want it to happen, he can just do it right now. Just let that shit out of that jar. I don't know. None of it really makes sense to me. But it's an ambiguous ending. It's cool. But the Blob 88, now this is getting a remake sometime in the next year or two. There's a little bit of news on it, I heard. I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, I feel like you can't top this movie with the story of the Blob. What more are they going to do to make it any better than this? Like, unless they stick to all practical effects and they change the story a bit and they have some new story to tell, I don't know. I'm open to see it, but I don't have really any high hopes for it. But alright, guys, that was a very fun watch because I forget just how good the effects are. Even though I put this film up with like the best of practical effects work. I forget just how fucking good it is until I rewatch it again. So this was fun. Wherever you're from, hope you're having a good morning, afternoon, or night, and I will talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.